Okay, well, thank you all for joining. This is day 5 of our ACSW Spring 2025 meeting. Thank you all for joining so far this week, and we're really excited to get started on our last day here. So just as a quick reminder, if you guys have any questions throughout the sessions, feel free to post them in the chat or in the Q&A box. Stephen Chen on the ACSW team, he's going to be monitoring and helping out with the Q&A. And then keep an eye out for a note probably next week, letting y'all know that the recordings and the presentations will be uploaded and available for y'all. Okay, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here. Let me introduce our first speakers of today. So we've got Ryan Schubert and Fazilia Abdul Kafarova. Ryan Schubert is an actuary at RGA working as part of the pricing team supporting RGA's U.S. individual life business. Ryan serves as a subject matter expert for underwriting modernization, supporting newer underwriting paradigms through program monitoring, data analysis, and assumption development. As part of his role, Ryan assists clients in understanding, evaluating, and implementing new sources of evidence for their underwriting programs. In his free time, Ryan enjoys playing golf and spending time with his wife and son. Fazilia Abdul Kafarova is the Executive Director of Underwriting Research and Development at RGA, where she focuses on underwriting innovation, concept development, and the integration of emerging data sources. An underwriter by background, she helps modernize risk assessment practices through research and strategic validation. Outside of work, she's a proud Philadelphia sports fan who enjoys time with her husband and 2 cats. Ryan and Fazilia, please take it away.
All right, we'll jump right in. Thank you for those intros, Alex. So as Alex mentioned, I'm Ryan. I'm an actuary here at RGA, our U.S. individual life area, really with a focus on accelerated underwriting and all the new types of underwriting that are going on. And I'm happy to give the actuarial perspective on some of the accelerated underwriting topics that we're going to discuss today. But in anything in life insurance, the actuarial perspective is really only half of the equation. So I'm very excited to be joined by Fazilia, who is my underwriting partner. She's my friend and my colleague. So she's going to be able to give us the underwriter's perspective. So I know a lot of times we're sort of insulated with other actuaries and we talk to actuaries about actuarial topics. So it's going to be really helpful, I think, to have Fazilia give her perspective on accelerated underwriting to help us get a fuller picture of all that's going on with the changes that are going on in the industry. And with that, we'll jump right in. So you guys have been doing this for a week now, limitations and disclosures. I'm sure this is not a new concept to you. So basically says that don't take any of these numbers as definite fact. Everything here is illustrative. And I'm sure I'll warn you of that fact a few more times throughout the presentation. So a quick high-level overview. So as you may or may not be aware, the underwriting paradigm is undergoing a pretty monumental shift, which is notable for the life insurance industry that typically doesn't move, or at least historically hasn't moved very fast. So we've seen a lot of changes over the last 10 to 15 years, really evolving the underwriting landscape. And along with that, there's an introduction of new digital evidences that are being utilized. Some of those evidences, specifically prescription histories, motor vehicle records, MIB, are almost universal in an accelerated underwriting context and are gaining momentum in a fully underwritten context as well. And in addition to those more universal evidences, there's also some of the newer evidences like medical claims, electronic health records, and lab picture that are starting to gain more prominence in accelerated underwriting as well. We're going to talk specifically about those 3 that I just mentioned in more depth later in the presentation. And with all these different changes, including changes to customer expectations, there's an increasing urge to accelerate more business, to issue more business through the accelerated lane. And insurers are tasked with being able to accomplish that, continue to deliver on their mission to issue more insurance in a way that is palatable to individuals. But in doing that, we also need to make sure that we're properly managing mortality and the mortality slippage that comes with accelerated underwriting. And so, Vazilia, to give the underwriter's perspective on the last couple of bullets here.
Thank you, Ryan. I appreciate it. And thank you so much for that wonderful intro. You did a much better job than I could have myself. As Ryan mentioned, the market's moving a lot faster than ever. Old habits and manual processes really can't keep up, and our evidence strategies really need to move along. So traditional underwriting is no longer scalable. To stay ahead, we must layer multiple data sources, test out new approaches, continuously test those approaches, and embrace a mindset of ongoing learning and adaptation. The last point here is collaboration is what moves us forward. I have the privilege of working with somebody like Ryan and his entire team and really get to see how they think of things and bring my underwriting perspective to it. But I want to say that no single group, not underwriters, not actuaries, not data scientists, can actually do this alone. Real breakthroughs will happen when we break down the silos and work together. The bottom line is our real advantage is not a single piece of evidence. It is not a single piece of technology. It's how we come together. And that spirit of partnership is really what's going to shape the future of underwriting. Now, before we go any deeper, we'd like to start off with a poll. Take your time to answer this, and I will just give you some background notes to talk through. This is really just a sense, I'm trying to get a sense of the room so we can see how the session will speak to and see where you are, and we can really tailor the session, the flow of this presentation as relevant as possible based on your feedback. So really appreciate you guys taking the time to do this poll.
Here we go. Yeah, I think it just popped up on my screen.
Perfect.
So I think just to add to what Fazilia mentioned, this is us trying to get a gauge for, Fazilia and I live and breathe this stuff every day. This is like water to us. We just absolutely love this stuff, and we're involved with it every day. But we recognize that that's not everybody else's reality. So we're trying to meet you where you are. I think it's also probably good for the audience to get a feel for. As we go through the next few slides, we'll probably also touch on some of the more foundational concepts related to this. So just a gut check that, if you are more of an expert or very familiar with these sorts of things, that not everybody in the audience is. So please forgive us if we say things that may be obvious to you. We just want to make sure that everybody's kind of starting from the same spot, and that those that don't work with this all day, every day, can get value from this presentation as well. So it looks like the poll is either closed or studied down. So, maybe not surprisingly, a lot of people in the middle, which is kind of what we expected here, but there's still lots of people who are getting their first real exposure or not very familiar with these concepts. And there's still a lot of folks that are intimately familiar with this. So I think that's pretty much what we expected, but it's good to hear that. We're going to try to give this presentation that's a combination of a 101 course, a 201 course, and a 301 to make sure that no matter what you answered here today, that you get some value out of this presentation. With that, we'll do quick overviews, keeping in mind that there are folks in here that probably know a lot of this, but there's also going to be some people who I think learn something from these next couple of slides that are a little bit more foundational. So if you think about what the life insurance world looked like 10, 15 years ago, you had the option of fully underwritten or simplified issue, and there really wasn't a whole lot in between. If you wanted the lowest premiums available or a high level of coverage, a larger face amount, you had to go through full underwriting. And that was a long, drawn out process. You may have to be subjected to labs and exams. And if you wanted a more convenient process, a faster decision time, you would have to go through simplified issue. Only lower face amounts were available, and the premiums were going to cost significantly more. So enter accelerated underwriting, which is attempting to be something of a best of both worlds. So if you think about the mortality spectrum or the underwriting rigor, accelerated underwriting is definitely closer, much closer to full underwriting than it is simplified issue. But it is somewhere in between full underwriting and simplified issue. Again, I mentioned it's trying to be the best of both worlds. It's going to be available to higher face amounts than simplified issue. It's going to have lower premiums than simplified issue, and it's going to have hopefully a faster decision time than full underwriting, at least for a portion of those applicants, those going through the accelerated path. So it's again trying to be the best of both worlds, somewhere between full underwriting and simplified issue, while still being pretty firmly towards the fully underwritten end of the spectrum. And again, I would be remiss if we sat here for an hour talking about accelerated underwriting and I didn't at least define it first. So again, maybe this is obvious, but when I'm out in the industry and people talk about accelerated underwriting, there's still times where someone says accelerated underwriting, but it sounds like they're talking about something that isn't quite accelerated underwriting. So I thought I would just quickly read off this definition. So whenever Fazilia and I talk about accelerated underwriting throughout this presentation, this is what we mean. Fully underwritten, full underwriting, or excuse me, accelerated underwriting to us is a fully underwritten process by which certain evidences are not required for a portion of applicants that demonstrate favorable risk characteristics. So if someone is eligible for accelerated underwriting, they might get an accelerated offer, or they might end up going through full underwriting, depending on the accelerated underwriting program and the applicant. So that is not simplified issue. It's not automated underwriting. It's accelerated underwriting. And this is how we're defining it. And then a brief history of how accelerated underwriting has evolved through the years. Specifically, accelerated underwriting really took off 11-ish years ago now. And in the beginning, carriers were much more conservative. This was a totally new concept. So it was limited to lower face amounts. Really, $1 million was the maximum you could get in the industry, and many carriers wouldn't allow even that high of a face amount through the accelerated path. Age 60 was really the maximum issue age in many ages, many carriers not allowing even that high. And it was really only available to those preferred risk classes. Fast forward 10-ish years, now accelerated underwriting has begun to expand. Carriers are looking to do more. That was really accelerated, as we know, maybe through COVID and through the pandemic, where carriers were looking for opportunities to issue life insurance policies without having a nurse having to come to your house and get fluids and exams. Is there a way that we can have a socially distanced insurance process? And so really accelerated underwriting kind of really took a big leap forward in that era. And it hasn't really gone back after the pandemic has wound down. So today, it's more common to see that $1 million cap, and sometimes carriers even have higher caps than that, 2, 3 million, increasingly common, and even some higher than that. That cap of issue age 60, gaining more and more frequency in the industry, and risk classes all the way down to standard being offered through the accelerated path is becoming more common. So accelerated underwriting is no longer just the easy yes cases. It's becoming able to underwrite folks even in those more complicated cases, able to issue a policy to people who probably wouldn't have gotten it 10 years ago under the old framework. And with this expansion of accelerated underwriting, there is a need for more information. If we're going to continue to issue more policies through this accelerated path, we're going to need more information to get comfortable with issuing these policies while still making sure that we have a good handle on mortality slippage. And so that leads us to our second of 2 polling questions. To the extent that you're familiar with your own company's accelerated underwriting program, and if you're not familiar, you don't know the details, feel free to abstain. But to the extent you're familiar, please feel free to select all that apply here. So medical claims could be part of a predictive model that is used to predict some kind of score. It could be raw medical claims. It could be in partnership with some sort of rules engine, lab picture. For those who are not familiar, it's a clinical labs that Fazilia is going to talk about a little bit more, and electronic health records. Those are less common, I think, on the front end of these accelerated underwriting paths, but a lot of folks are using EHRs on the back end for their post-issue audit process to better understand how mortality slippage is evolving. And it looks like, okay, cool. Lots of good responses here. Fazilia, anything stand out here? Are these pretty much what you expected, or do these results surprise you a little bit?
Actually, it's really fascinating to see how the adoption really varies. I'm pleasantly surprised to see the EHRs are pretty high up there. They are pretty detailed, but they can still present operational challenges at scale, but nice to see that the numbers are over 20% that we've normally seen. Lab picture is really gaining momentum right now as underwriters are looking for more richer clinical lab insights. And as we can probably all deduce, and I'm not surprised by this, medical claims really lead the way because they tend to be one of the most accessible data points in the beginning of the underwriting process and really important for underwriting, accelerated underwriting programs. So it's really interesting to see how these patterns just show how our industry is really evolving and how much we can learn from each other when we bring in new evidences to play. All right, thank you, Ryan. So I was also happy to see that there were some people that are kind of exploring the different digital evidences. So let's do a quick overview here. I say quick, but it's not always quick. So today we have access to so much digital evidence. It really does allow us to get a clearer, more holistic view of an applicant. But when we put these data sources together in a strategic way, we can put those isolated pictures of an applicant's health put together and make a whole picture. It's really good for underwriting and it's great for actuarial, but proper evidence layer allows us to underwrite with more precision, identify risks sooner, and ultimately deliver better decisions. So we'll talk a little bit more about evidence layering, but let's break down the main sources that we currently rely on. So let's start with clinical labs. These are physician-ordered tests. So like an A1C for diabetes, your cholesterol panels, and your liver function test. We typically get these data points from a LabCorp, like a Quest or a regional lab, and insurance labs as well. The great thing about this, it gives us objective quantitative data. Sometimes it can even flag an issue before the applicant even knows it. There were multiple instances where I've seen a high A1C come back on insurance labs and actually tips you off with an undiagnosed diabetes. You end up talking to the agent talks to the client, and the client is pretty happy to give those results to their doctor. Here's a big caveat though. Labs only tell us what's tested. If the applicant hasn't seen a doctor recently or if certain tests were not ordered, we could really miss something important. And just because all lab values are normal does not necessarily mean there's no risk. It just means what was tested really looks good on paper. Next is dental records. This might be a little bit unusual and it's not one data point that we had in our poll, but it is coming up more. It can provide a comprehensive view of an applicant's oral health. You might ask, why do we really care? Honestly, frequent dental infections and extensive work at the dentist can really trigger deeper reviews, especially with tobacco use detection and things like cardiovascular risk. But the challenge is dental record availability varies very greatly. It does depend on the applicant's habits. And does the office really have record keeping that's accessible? Sometimes the data is just not there. The next one is EHRs. That is the big one here. The EHR really captures the entire clinical journey. It's the encounters with the doctor, the progress notes, lifestyle factors, and so much more. EHRs blend structured data, like your problem lists and vitals, and unstructured notes. And I'll go a little bit detailed about unstructured notes, but those unstructured notes are so important because they actually provide the story behind the story. The challenge with the EHRs that I've heard of and I've seen myself firsthand is it can be a little bit overwhelming with the information received and not every provider uses the same systems. So sometimes records can come back fragmented. You might be missing pieces. You might be getting something today and another EHR maybe a couple of hours later. When I talked about unstructured notes, what that means is that's just data you can't really readily put into a database and be able to report off of. So you really have to read those notes. And that unstructured data can give you a lot of information about social history, physicians' concerns, patient behaviors, and something that adds on more than just pure lab numbers. So although unstructured notes can tell us a little more detail, but one doctor might mention things in unstructured data while another one leaves it out. So we really have to be careful about making assumptions because we may or may not have incomplete EHRs. So finally, medical claims. Claims data tracks official diagnoses via ICD codes or SNOMED and procedures by CPT codes. So this is really all the billing activity for an applicant as they move through the healthcare ecosystem. Claims are standardized. They could follow an applicant throughout the entire process across different providers, and it really gives us a longitudinal view of their healthcare journey. The claims data can help us spot patterns, so frequent ER visits or recurring treatments may trigger something for an underwriter to review, while there might be other records that don't tell the full story. One really big caveat I want to make about claims is just because there is a diagnosis code does not mean the applicant has that condition. So sometimes providers tend to use certain codes to rule out conditions. So for example, you might run an A1C just to justify ordering that test and to rule out if a client has diabetes. That does not mean that the client has diabetes itself. And the thing is with claims, you don't always get the actual results from it. So you might have to go out and get some lab data just to verify. And this is all part of the adjudication process where claims are processed for healthcare billing, not necessarily to confirm a final diagnosis. So when we see things like chest pain, it's just a signal for an underwriter to look a little further, and that is not proof that the client has some sort of chest pain or heart failure. One thing that is really interesting, there are some vendors that do marry prescription data with the claims data. So that really does help you to take a look at to see if there's treatment, to see if an actual condition exists. So as underwriters, we may take a look at things like lab picture, RX data, EHRs, or other follow-up kind of requirements just to make sure we have the full picture before making a call on a single claim that we might see in claims data. Thank you, Ryan. So the next couple of things I want to talk about is just really defining the wealth of the digital underwriting evidence. As we think of our evidence strategy, it's important to remember every data source brings an opportunity, but also complexity. There's really no single answer in modern underwriting, but we need a toolkit, something that is thoughtful, can be fundamentally changed and reviewed, and really change the way we underwrite and price risk. So let's walk through all the dimensions such as cost, turnaround time, or as I say, speed, degree of friction, availability, and the quality of the labs and vitals within each data source. Starting off with cost, because it's always top of mind, digital evidence can absolutely deliver dramatic savings. I mean, claims data or clinical lab data would be a fraction of the cost that you would pay for a paramed exam or labs. For example, running a lab picture might cost tens of dollars, while a full paramed exam and labs can exceed over hundreds of dollars. But low cost comes with some caveats, so it can be deceptive. If we layer too many sources, the lower cost data leads to more ambiguous results and might require follow-up question or additional ordering of evidences. Therefore, the savings can really quickly diminish. So one really big takeaway from all this, it's not about minimizing spend at all costs. It's about maximizing the return for each evidence ordered. Now, Ryan, if you don't mind, thank you. Let's talk about turnaround time, or as I say, speed. Clearly, I like fast cars. As an underwriter, that's a great avocation. So the Amazon effect is very, very real. Most people expect answers to today's questions yesterday. The ability to obtain actionable evidence in minutes or hours rather than weeks is a huge paradigm shift that Ryan talked to in the very beginning. Lab picture medical claims can be returned within minutes, if not seconds. However, the speed is not guaranteed. EHRs, especially from small provider networks, can actually take days, sometimes even weeks, due to consent processes, additional consents that are needed, and even provider response times. However, speed without accuracy and completeness is just more noise and uncertainty. And as underwriters and actuaries, I don't think we want that at all. Now off to friction. I feel like this dimension gets much less attention than anything else, but it really has a massive impact on the workflow and the applicant experience, all the way from the very beginning with the agent sales force to the very end of issuing a policy. In a perfect world, digital evidence means less friction, fewer touch points, less paperwork, less manual review, less back and forth between an agent and an underwriter. But the reality is it's complicated. Not all data sources is easy to work with. Some can deliver beautifully structured, ready to use data. Others come in a small PDF with little writing, it's very messy, or even handwritten notes, and that takes hours to interpret. There could be integration issues between the vendors that you're using. There's inconsistent formats, there's conflicting results. It all can add friction to the entire process. One thing that I think it's important, I think Ryan and I really definitely agree with this, is to kind of monitor your fallback rates. Ask yourselves, how often do we abandon the digital process and revert to traditional methods? How often are you cleaning up the data? How often are you clarifying the data that you get with clarifying questions? And how often does the applicant have to go through additional steps in order to get the final risk assessment? So reducing friction isn't just good for the applicants or the agents. It's really what turns digital transformation from a buzzword to real progress. Now to availability. So digital evidence is more available than ever. In many programs, there's over 70% of applicants who have claims data and lab data available, and EHR access just keeps expanding. Availability is dynamic, but can shift overnight due to regulatory changes. Providers can come and go. They might have a time where they're off. Vendor fees can just disappear overnight and come back the next day. So really understand that availability is not consistent. We have to be nimble. Underwriters really need to have an alternative workflow when there are data gaps, and actuaries should have real-time availability metrics to keep the pricing accurate. It's not the size of your data that matters, it's how quickly you can pivot when the ground underneath you just shifts. Finally, when we talk about the different evidence types, ask yourselves what labs and vitals are actually available. Labs and vitals are so important to underwriting. It is probably the keystone of the data points that you need. A couple of things. Clinical labs can give us real life lab results from physician orders and even some historical insurance labs, as mentioned in Lab Picture. Claims data does not give us lab data directly and doesn't always give us vitals. We'll have things like BMI, but it does include codes that can signal labs were done or there are vitals that you need to look into that are related to conditions. EHRs often include both labs and vitals, especially when structured feeds are in place. But there might be times where EHRs might have things like you have an abnormal BMI or an elevated BMI. You don't actually have the values associated with it. With insurance and exams and labs, you get the most curated set of vitals and labs. We all know this. This is the purpose that was used for insurance risk assessment. We are really stepping away from that. And the bottom line is not every source gives you vitals, but many point you towards the clinical truth if you know how to read the signals properly. So this is where the evidence layering comes into play. Not everything gives you the entire picture. We have to know where to pull the trigger and the lever that will give you the final risk assessment. So the key takeaway here is this is not about gathering all the data. It's about using the right data at the right time. What do I mean by that? The real lesson here is that the future of underwriting is not collecting more. It's about orchestrating the right evidence at the right time, refining how you use it, and the most effective programs are going to be agile, have the discipline to adapt quickly to changes, and be able to work together. Now over to Ryan to discuss some white papers that RGA recently published that really paint a picture of all that we've discussed so far.
Yeah, thanks, Fazilia. I think that was a great background into a lot of the details that maybe as actuaries we don't always think about. So I think that's a great qualitative overview of some of these digital evidences. And for the next several slides, we're going to get into some more of the quantitative pieces. So as Fazilia mentioned, we recently published a couple of white papers related to digital underwriting evidence and the protective value or the minimization of slippage related to these different digital underwriting evidences. So we conducted this study with 2 separate carriers. So we started out with what we're calling the foundational data. In this case, that is app disclosures, prescription histories, MVRs, and MIB data. And using that foundational data, our underwriters made an accelerated underwriting decision. And then they reevaluated the case, layering in different digital underwriting evidences. So foundational data plus lab picture, foundational data plus medical claims, foundational data plus EHRs, and then combinations of 2 of those digital underwriting evidences, and then all 3 of them if they're available. And so we've got different accelerated underwriting decisions based on these different combinations of digital evidences. And in addition to that, we also have the fully underwritten decision. So whatever labs and ordered or an AP course of full underwriting, we also have that decision to compare our slippage to. And so from here, we can compare how does the slippage change and layering in these different pieces of digital evidence. Okay, so I just mentioned slippage again. So for those the subset of folks that are intimately familiar with these concepts, this is maybe not new, but just a quick refresher. When we talk about slippage, we often look at a confusion matrix. So, for example, here you can see the accelerated underwriting decision across the top and the fully underwritten decision in the rows. So this top left cell here says there's 100. This is saying there were 100 cases that when they went through accelerated underwriting got an offer of super preferred. And those for those 100 cases, the full underwriting decision agreed. If you go down to the second row, first column, there's it says a 10. So that is 10 cases where the accelerated underwriting said these applicants were super preferred risks, but full underwriting would have assigned them to preferred. So because these people got a better risk class than what full underwriting would have said, there's mortality cost there. So for this example, you can use your pricing assumptions and come up with that slippage. For this example, it's 13%. We don't need to focus on what the underlying assumptions are. They vary by every different carrier's got their own different sets of assumptions. That's just a quick high level info around what is slippage and how is it calculated. And then a quick reminder that we're only considering those policies that went through accelerated underwriting, that got an accelerated decision. It doesn't consider people where they were referred to underwriter. So your accelerated underwriting program doesn't get credit for forwarding people to full underwriting that the accelerated process couldn't make a decision on. So again, for example, these 30 cases in the gray box in the bottom right here, those aren't calculated as part of slippage and accelerated underwriting. The slippage for this case would still be the same 13% that we saw on the prior slide. However, so for this study, we have new data. We've got this new digital underwriting evidence. And as we get more and more new digital underwriting evidence, there's a potential to know potentially more about an applicant than we would have known at the time of full underwriting. There might be information in some digital underwriting evidences that wouldn't have been ordered or wouldn't have been available at the time of full underwriting. Maybe it's pieces of evidence that wouldn't show up in an APS or things of that nature. So for our case study, whenever our underwriters re-underwrote these cases, some of the times they said these cases, maybe they should be referred to underwriter. And so trying to think through the math of, do we take credit for these cases that may have made it through in a typical accelerated underwriting program, but now that we're introducing digital underwriting evidences, they wouldn't go through, or they'd be referred to underwriter, or maybe they would have gotten a worse class. And the right way to do it is, the answer is there is no right way. It's kind of complicated. So if you ignore everybody that would not have gotten an accelerated underwriting decision that did get a fully underwritten decision, if you just ignore those people in your slippage calculation, you get the upper end of that slippage guess. That's the bottom line. You have a 12% slippage. If you take credit for these people that don't get an accelerated offer that would have gotten a fully underwritten offer, your slippage is more like 6%. And in reality of what real slippage is, what you would expect to see in reality, is probably somewhere between that 6 and 12%. So whenever we talk about slippage in a couple of slides, we're going to show both of those numbers as a range, and just keeping in mind that the real answer is somewhere in between. And with that, we'll actually get into some study results. First, we'll kind of talk about what these different abbreviations mean. Maybe they're not obvious. So FD plus LP means foundational data plus lab picture. MC is medical claims. EHR is electronic health records. Maybe the next thing you'll notice is that these case counts are pretty lumpy, and what's going on there. So what's happening here is that this is a retrospective study. With our carrier partner, we were sort of subject to whatever data was available at the time of the study. And so not every digital evidence was ordered for every case. And so in that case, we were just working with whatever evidence was available. So this isn't saying, that the medical claims hit rate is double the lab picture hit rate. That's not at all the message here. It's just in this very specific case study that we did, that medical claims data was more widely available than the lab picture data. As a result, every row has a different baseline. So it's difficult in this table that I'm going to slowly reveal here to compare each line against different lines. You sort of have to compare the foundational data decision versus the foundational plus digital underwriting evidence slippage. Another piece of the analysis that we considered was the decision rate. So if you see the third column, This is saying for the very first row that for these 153 cases, the underwriters were comfortable making a decision 78% of the time. And then when we layered on the respective digital underwriting evidence, so for this first row, layering in lab picture, our underwriters felt comfortable making a decision an additional 1% of the time on these 153 cases. So again, for the second row, looking at foundational data plus medical claims, if just looking at the foundational data, the decision rate was 76%, then when adding in medical claims, underwriters were overall less comfortable. The decision rate actually went down 6%. So that was the first thing that caught my eye whenever I started looking at these results. So a couple of things to call out. First is that the medical claims here are truly raw medical claims. This isn't part of some vendor that provides rules or you know, helps categorize or any predictive model around these medical claims. It's really raw medical claims information. And Fazilia did a great job calling out that sometimes there are rule-out diagnoses or things that without any other context might raise questions in an underwriter's eyes that doesn't actually help them make a decision, actually leads to more questions than answers. So I think that helps explain what's going on here. Now, as you use a vendor that has medical claims data, something other than raw medical claims, your decisions may vary. So I'll just call that out. Sometimes medical claims can lead to additional questions, but depending on your mileage may vary essentially. I'll also call out that these numbers are all meant to be indicative. Every carrier is going to have slightly different results. So excuse me if I say that several times over these next couple of slides, but these numbers are meant to be indicative, not to be taken totally as the absolute truth. More of just the directionally, how are things progressing. And then the piece that maybe we're the most interested in, the slippage. So again, if we take a look at the first row, when just looking at foundational data and making a decision, and comparing that decision to the fully underwritten decision, which we're taking as the truth, the correct answer in this case, the carrier saw 71% slippage. Now, okay, again, I mentioned that these numbers aren't meant to be the absolute truth. Every carrier is going to have different numbers. Your mileage is going to vary, right? This is a very high slippage number, higher than what is typically true. This specific carrier had a high degree of non-disclosure, so that was partially what was leading to these high slippage when just relying on foundational data. And then you can see as we layer in lab picture, the slippage rate goes down 20 to 30-ish%, which is pretty material. And as you go through all these different cases, again, remembering that you can't really compare each line to itself, or can't compare lines against one another, but rather you have to compare them to themselves. You're more interested in the movement from 71% to this 43 to 46% range. You may notice that the gray lines here are trending upward. Again, that is not something that's not a real trend that we're interested in. You can't compare any of these categories because we have changing subsets. What we're really interested in is the movement from the gray line to the blue bars. So what we may notice is that electronic health records have a pretty strong reduction in slippage, whether it's by itself or in combination with other tools. And we can see that whenever we start to combine these tools, we really see a strong decrease in mortality slippage. Maybe that's not surprising. Fazilia mentioned, having more data does help you make more decisions, but sometimes it also causes a high degree of friction. There's also going to be cost implications. So not saying that the solution is always order more evidence and hope for the best. To really make sure that you're maximizing these products, you should probably order them more systematically and make sure that you have a program to help your underwriters make those decisions consistently. And I mentioned we did this for 2 carriers. This is the results for the second carrier. Overall, very similar results. Different starting level. Again, saying for one more time that the numbers vary by carrier. Here, the starting slippage numbers are closer to 20%, which is a little bit closer to what you would expect to see as a more common slippage in the industry. The other thing that might immediately pop out is that some of these bars go below 0%. And you may be wondering to yourself, Ryan, are you telling me that if we use these digital underwriting evidences that all of a sudden we're going to have better than fully underwritten mortality? No, no, I'm not saying that. Again, these slippage numbers are ranges. It takes a non-traditional approach to how we're including some of these policies that may have gotten declined or referred to full underwriting based on these new digital underwriting evidences. Presumably, if we start downgrading a bunch of people based on new information, you're going to have a lot of very upset carriers, folks in distribution, a lot of upset individuals trying to apply for life insurance. You might have lower placement rates. So again, these numbers are meant to be indicative in terms of trend rather than taken for the absolute truth. Again, we can see that EHRs provide a tremendous amount of value, and we tend to see even more improvement when partnering some of these tools together. So we talked a lot about slippage, but next we're going to sort of talk about some of the drivers of slippage. So whenever we looked at our data that we have from our client carrier partners, we noticed that two of the biggest drivers of slippage were tobacco non-disclosure and build misrepresentation. Those two alone count for approximately 40% of the mortality impact in mortality slippage for accelerated underwriting. So if there's a way to address those pieces in accelerated underwriting, we can really start to make a dent in those slippage numbers. So again, a couple of different studies we did. For the first one was on a more traditional carrier on a more limited subset of data, and the second on a direct consumer carrier. And I'll remind you guys of this as we go through some of the. So first of all, we'll talk about. So we're looking at smoking non-disclosure here, folks that we catch as part of the underwriting process. If we look at the first bar, that is insurance labs, those are sort of the gold standard, right? That's how we're going to catch most of our smoking in a fully underwritten context. If people don't disclose that they're a smoker, but they get tested and take a cotinine test, this is where it's going to show up. So how do these digital underwriting evidences compare to the gold standard insurance labs? APSs and EHRs do a strong job. It's maybe a little bit better than half of those folks that insurance labs would catch. So insurance labs, again, are just over 2%. APS and EHRs are between 1 and 1.5%, which I was surprised. That seems like a larger number than I would have expected. But it's also a pretty far away from what insurance labs are, especially as insureds start to realize that they probably won't have to go through labs and exams. Maybe they are even more encouraged to not disclose their smoking habits. And then medical claims and lab picture. Medical claims this might surprise some folks. It's about 0.25% here. But remember that this is somebody who said they weren't a smoker. They had a smoking related medical claim, and then the underwriter felt comfortable enough changing that person's class from non-smoker to smoker. So if you think about your own non-smoker rules, a non-smoker might just be somebody who hasn't smoked in the last 12 months or 24 months. In this case, we would need a medical claim from the last year or so, and the underwriter would have to feel comfortable switching the class to smoker. So it's not just enough to have a medical claim related to smoking. You also have to make sure that it's actionable. And the last piece I'll talk about is the lab picture here. It's represented as 0. So the cotinine test that folks take in order to detect smoking in an insured application is not very common in clinical practice. Very rarely is a doctor going to order a cotinine test. And as a result, the only time that lab picture is going to be able to find that is if someone was submitted to insurance labs at a prior date, if they previously had labs and exams. So lab picture as a smoke detector is probably going to have diminishing value going forward. So what I will say is here, there is no great smoke detector that can get back to what insurance labs were. So in addition to these digital underwriting evidences, we're also going to have to incorporate behavioral science. It's changing to make applicants more comfortable sharing the truth. It's normalizing the behavior. Instead of asking, do you smoke, asking, got a cigarette or some other tobacco product, and really helping, making folks admitting the truth and helping with that non-disclosure. Quick chart, since we're all actuaries, we like to see, build, misrepresentation, BMI, miscategorization. That's important here because, as you can see in the different relative risk chart here, as we get further away from the best risk category, that 25 to 30 BMI category, we really do start to see a pretty material increase in relative risk. So, is build information more widely available? And maybe not surprisingly, yes, it is. So again, any paramed exam that's ordered is going to have that build information. That's something we look for as a part of the insurance process. But APS and EHRs have hit rates related to build in the 70 to 90% rate, which again is pretty good, but not 100% of the time. And then focusing on medical claims and lab picture here, this is showing that we have build related data about 20 to 30% of the time, medical claims and lab picture. Again, I'll call out that lab picture only has build information whenever it's related to an insurance application. So if you go to the doctor and you get weighed and your height measured, that's going to be recorded somewhere else. That's not as part of going to submitting to labs as part of your normal clinical labs process. So the only places where lab picture is going to have build is from prior insurance applications. And then again, we can dig in a little bit deeper with evidence study too. Again, this was a direct to consumer carrier as opposed to the prior carrier who was a more traditional insured. If we focus on the top chart, we can see that medical claims information is more widely available for females rather than males. Maybe that's not surprising given that women tend to interact with the medical system more and more frequently than males. And hit rate also increases as age increases. Again, as you get older, you're more likely to be engaging with a doctor more routinely. I'll also call out that in the evidence study number 2, which was a direct-to-consumer carrier, we see higher hit rates for medical claims than for lab picture. Again, that's likely due to the fact that those traditional insured market is more likely to have had a history of insurance rather than this direct-to-consumer, which might be reaching a new piece of the market that was previously untapped by insurance. And similar results here that hit rates increase by age, but here we see that males have a higher hit rate than females. And that's likely due to the fact that the insured population skews male. So males are more likely to have had an insurance lab panel before. And I'll pass it to Fazilia. Yeah.
Thank you, Ryan. Really appreciate those insights and appreciate the call outs from an underwriting standpoint. See, when you collaborate, you can totally be an underwriter too. I just really, those insights really show that there's one thing that's crystal clear, the future about being data smart is more important than just being data rich. And it really does take a village. This leads perfectly to this point where the future isn't built in silos, it's built in partnership. When you work together, you can create solutions that are not just technically sound, but also practical and sustainable. That's how we can protect mortality, improve the client experience, and keep our organizations ahead of the curve. Now to Ryan to talk about how underwriters and actuaries might see things a little bit differently.
Yeah, thanks, Julia. So whenever we were talking about partnering, I think the first example that came to mind is the use of predictive models. And with these digital underwriting evidences, that's becoming more and more common, right? Can we have a predictive model to summarize all this information and come up with a number? And to actuaries, predictive models are just fancy math formulas, right? If as you get more and more familiar with predictive models, I think it becomes less scary as an actuary. It's really just a fancy math formula. But to underwriters, it's this black box. You know, they didn't take 8 years of actuarial exams. They're their own kind of experts. They're experts in underwriting each individual person. They care about the tree, whereas the actuaries care about the forest. to an underwriter, predictive model is something that approximates their job, what they would have done, but maybe not even as well as they could do, given enough time and energy. So it's really important for the actuaries to be able to explain predictive models and what the model is attempting to do in a way that underwriters can appreciate, to help them do their job more efficiently, more effectively, and to understand the strengths and the weaknesses of those predictive models so that they are better enabled to do their job.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. So I want to give a quick caveat that we can make a promise that no underwriters or actuaries were harmed in the making of this pain point section, although a few egos may or may not be bruised at the end of this, so we apologize for that in advance. Collaboration is not always easy. Let's be realistic. It can really definitely slow us down at first. It's really the only way to make our solutions actually work in the real world. And when I say collaboration, I'm not saying just, hey, Ryan, here's some information on underwriting, and Ryan sent an email back. It's really sharing that information, building that trust with each other, setting shared goals, having the honest conversation about what's working and what's not, and sometimes challenging each other's assumptions and being open about mistakes. As Ryan mentioned earlier, underwriters bring a deep case insight, really can catch subtle signals, where actuaries can bring analytical rigor, big picture view, but together they can create a richer, forward-thinking risk understanding. But underwriters and actuaries work in lockstep. We can definitely streamline decision-making. We can reduce rework. We can spot gaps that we wouldn't see on our own, or inconsistencies before they become really costly issues. We've also been much more positioned to adapt to industry changes, whether there's a new data source, a regulatory development, or an emerging risk. Now over to Ryan to talk about best practices on collaborating together.
Yeah, I think Fazilia really hit on it. So it's really making sure that we're in collaboration with our underwriters. They are experts in what they do. And so we need to rely on underwriters whenever we pursue these accelerated underwriting topics, and even just day-to-day business, trying to understand and leverage their expertise to help us make sure that we're accomplishing our goals. Underwriters are really boots on the ground. I think they're on the front lines of this risk assessment. It depends on underwriters doing their job for us to have our pricing assumptions to work out as expected, right? So really, we should be leaning on their expertise. And they're a blast at happy hour. Feel free to call up your underwriter and have a chat with them. They're a lively bunch, and they're a lot of fun to work with. So keeping an eye on the clock, we'll start wrapping up here. So as we talked about, accelerated underwriting's programs are expanding. They're trying to make more risks available to this accelerated path. And we're going to need new digital tools in our tool chest in order to be able to accomplish these accelerating more business.
Faster, more reliable evidence does mean fewer cases might fall through the cracks, but more applicants get timely offers, and our teams can really spend less time on manual follow-up. You can really move forward with your digital underwriting evidence strategy and focus on key areas, reducing your slippage, ensuring the data is actually available, the data is actually usable, and improving offer rates. But you really want to make the best use of underwriting and actuarial resources at the same time.
Yeah, and beyond these digital evidences, there's a lot of value that can be gleaned from those, but the softer side is making sure that those applications utilize behavioral science so that applicants feel empowered to tell the truth and to disclose all those pieces that we're most interested in, so that we don't have as much slippage from the get-go.
And remember, the path to better, faster, more accurate underwriting and risk pricing is really paved with partnership. Think about everything from your slippage reduction to data availability to offer rates, resource allocation. These are levers that we pull best when cross-functional teams work hand in hand. To truly lead in this era, we cannot settle for keeping up. We have to keep learning, keep adapting, and keep challenging each other to set the standard. So my final takeaway for all of this is, let's not react to the change, let's shape it, and let's work together.
And with that, we've got maybe 5 minutes for questions. I know you guys have a presentation after this, but maybe there's time for a question or two.
Yeah. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Fazilia. So We actually have several comments in the discussion. I think I won't read it word by word because there's quite a few, but I think they are questioning or slash comments on the kind of the trade-off between the benefit from the accelerated underwriting in terms of efficiency and and also at the same time accelerated underwriting also sacrifice some of the accuracy of in terms of the risk assessment. I guess what's your view on this?
Yeah, I'll try to answer that one. I think I understand the question, but yeah, certainly there's a trade-off between having a smoother process for the applicants and getting less information on them, right? So that's something that you have to balance. Any amount of slippage is potentially tolerable as long as your pricing can account for it. If there's 50% slippage, but you priced for 50% slippage, then maybe that can work. It's also about being targeted and making sure that you have the information and the program set up so that you're meeting your goals and continuously monitoring your program with like random holdouts and post-issue audits to make sure that things are developing as you expect. Yeah, you probably can't accelerate every single policy because then that starts to look like something other than accelerated underwriting. So yeah, it's about making sure that you're meeting the goals of your organization and the goals of your customers.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. And then we also have another question. Have we reached the point where we have any information on actual mortality with accelerated underwriting as opposed to just comparing with fully underwriting decisions?
I don't know if that was a planted question, but the answer is yes. We're on the precipice of having borderline credible mortality information. So I am actually presenting with a couple of other reinsurers at the SOA's Underwriting Innovation Symposium coming up here in July, where we will be giving a sneak peek into early mortality results. So any individual company may not have credible results, but as reinsurers, we have a broader view of the industry. And though it's very, very early and results or claims are far from credible, we are starting to get an idea of mortality results and how they vary from slippage. I won't go into too much detail at this point. I don't want to spoil anything for my presentation coming up in July, but the answer is we're starting to, and it's very exciting. In the next few years, I think will be very telling on where does accelerated underwriting go from here.
Awesome. That's good news, right? Also, another question we have here is, are you aware of any Gen AI being utilized in summarizing structuring the unstructured EHR data?
I can take this one. Yes, there are tools out there that use Gen AI to not only structure and unstructured data, but also summarize things like APSs to kind of help the underwriter's efficiency. There's times where the APSs are 3,000, 4,000 pages, and it really does kind of increase the efficiency of how quickly we review it. There's a couple of things that is important to keep in mind. Structured and unstructured data can be very overwhelming. You have to work with your data science team. You actually have to bring in IT sometimes to get things going, but they're not perfect. So you have to keep in mind things like bias and fairness and using those tools, but also utilize that and utilize it in a very governed way. So if you are using with anything Gen AI, one thing I will tell you as a takeaway is definitely have a team where you can have data governance, where you can explain how you're doing things, why you're doing certain things, modeling it, and really be able to, so if tomorrow a reinsurance partner or regulator comes up to you and asks, how did you do this? You might want to be able to present documentation. There's definitely tools out there, and really work with your reinsurance partners to see what the tools are and that will fit your needs that you need to have.
And I did go ahead and throw up our emails. I know we're coming up on time. There's another presentation next. So, but if there are any specific questions, you can reach Fazilia and me at our emails that should be on the screen right now.
Okay.
Yeah, with that, I'll pass it back to the ACSW crew and just thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both.